It always takes an extra second on Rockfin. And we're also going to be streaming on Rockfin. We're on YouTube and on Rockfin.
Very good.
All right, welcome everyone to Franc Analysis. I'm your host, Franco. I'm happy to be joined today again for a third time by an excellent guest, Caleb Maupin. Caleb is a socialist and journalist from RT, and he's the host of his own YouTube channel named after himself, Caleb Maupin. Thank you very much for being here, Caleb. How are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. I went through about a week break, had to recharge. This kind of field can be stressful sometimes, and we need some time for ourselves. Being in the spotlight, it can be stressful, and we need some time to recharge. But I'm back, and I'm glad that you're my first guest to have on.
Sure thing. Yeah, and I'm glad to be back. I took some time off a little while back, and the internet is full of haters, but we just got to keep doing. It's an upward battle that we're fighting. So glad to have you back. I'm glad that I'm back. There we go.
So I have Caleb on here today because he had a very interesting thesis that he presented to his audience on a live stream about a month ago, on March 4th of this year. It was about the future of our society and how we can achieve socialism in the US. You started this by talking about a conversation that you had with a libertarian about China and Russia. They agree that China's government has a lot of involvement in their oil and in other businesses. They also said that the middle class in China and Russia are prospering, while here in the US, the middle class and small businesses are getting crushed. There is something that socialists and these lower level capitalists both believe in that the higher level capitalists don't believe in. So I just wanted to talk to you about that a little bit more, go into more in depth. But what is that thing that socialists and lower level capitalists both agree on that the higher level capitalist does not agree on?
Well, it's growth. It's that growth is good. And it's interesting because, I reflected. I have a good friend who's an airport bartender. And before the pandemic, he would frequently meet Southern guys, small business owners from Alabama, from Texas. He would meet, Midwestern furniture store owners and people like that were flying back to the United States from China. And these would be conservative guys, Confederate flag, Republicans, and they would think China was amazing. They would say, China is the future. I go to China and these people are working hard and they believe in growth. And these small business owners who hate communism and hate socialism and think Obama and Biden are a bunch of commies, they love China. It's a weird contradiction. I have pointed out many times that, what made both Russia and China into economic superpowers is socialism. It's the fact that the banks, factories, and industries were organized to serve public good and not profits. It was with the 5-year plans of Stalin that Russia became a huge industrial power, the top producer of steel in the world, wiped out illiteracy, electrified the country. It's been with state central planning, with government-controlled banking, government-controlled steel manufacturing, 5-year economic plans that China has become, the economic superpower it is. I pointed that out, and there was a libertarian once who criticized me. And they said, well, that's very true, right? There's huge government-controlled oil and huge government-controlled natural gas in Russia. In China, the government controls banking. It controls the major industries like steel. It controls the huge telecommunications manufacturers like Huawei. But in both Russia and in China, what has made their system work more effectively has been kind of an alliance between this huge state-controlled sector of the economy and small business owners, and that there's been kind of an alliance. And other socialist countries have done the same thing. If you look at Nicaragua, for example, what makes the Sandinistas, and their socialist government very successful is their micro-entrepreneur program. If you look at, Vietnam, they talk about Vietnam's economic boom. The World Business Forum has just praised Vietnam and pointed out that Vietnam, through having a state-controlled program of education, a state-controlled infrastructure program, having a state-controlled stock market, state-controlled lending of money, they've been able to help many Vietnamese people open their own businesses. And that this kind of alliance between a government, a socialist government and a market sector, it has worked because the socialist government and the market sector both believe in economic growth. But here in the United States and in the West in general, not just the United States, but Britain, Germany, elsewhere, the economy is dominated by these huge multinational corporations. The big oil companies, Chevron, BP, Shell Oil, Royal Dutch Shell, and ExxonMobil. The big banks, HSBC Bank, Chase. These big major banks that dominate Wall Street, these big major oil companies, the Silicon Valley, corporations, the tech giants, they don't believe in economic growth. They're at the top of the mountain. It's like a game of King of the Mountain that kids used to play. They're at the top of the mountain, and they've declared growth must end, that human progress must end. They have more or less a Malthusian worldview. There are too many people in the world. We're over-consuming. There's just too much consumption. And they want to basically end human progress and stay at the top of the pyramid, right? Meanwhile, in Russia and China, in Nicaragua, in Vietnam, and Cuba, they're saying, no, we want to raise our people out of poverty. We want to develop. We want to build. And what's interesting is the small business owners in the United States, they have a similar view, right? The small town, furniture store owner, the lower level capitalists in the United States, they also want to keep growing. So Russia and China, Vietnam, Cuba, these kind of countries, they believe in growth. Low-level capitalists in the United States believe in growth. Meanwhile, it's the ultra monopolies, these huge multinational corporations that don't believe in growth any longer, that think growth is bad, that there are too many people in the world, there's too much consumption, that are trying to hold back human progress so they can stay at the top of the pyramid. So that's why it gets a little confusing, and you'll hear libertarians praising Russia and China, even though those countries have more state-controlled economies. It's on the basis that there's kind of a convergence of interest. That's the appeal of libertarianism. I vehemently disagree with libertarian economic theories. I think we do need a government of action. We need the state to try and raise people up out of poverty. But libertarians do believe in growth, and so do Marxists. If you read Karl Marx and his writings, he is all about economic growth. So growth is good. If you're not growing, if you're not reproducing new cells in your body, you die, right? When someone tells you that growth is bad, they're trying to kill you. And that's the basis of pessimism, right? Hopelessness. We can't have a better tomorrow. That is destructive stuff. So I believe in growth. So do low-level capitalists. So do the socialist countries of the world. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I can think of some examples of some people who are higher level capitalists who do believe in not having any more growth, thinking that overpopulation is the problem, not in the way that their lifestyle is and how they're over exploiting resources, abusing resources. But could you let the audience know what are some examples of these high level capitalists and what are some examples of the low level capitalists?
Well, when you talk about, the ultra rich in the United States, there's a long time there's been talk about what you call the Eastern establishment, and specifically the Rockefeller family. That is probably in U.S. history the richest family in all of U.S. history. And they very much came to the conclusion in the 1950s that growth is bad. And they were very blatant in saying so. There are too many people in the world. They bankrolled the promotion of the work of Margaret Sanger to promote birth control, not because they believed in women's rights, but because they believed there's too many people. They were associated with the neo-Malthusian society. And they very much believed that growth was bad. And this led to them being, having a fight with other elements in the Republican Party. They didn't like Richard Nixon, et cetera. And really the Rockefeller foundations and the think tanks associated with them, like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Ford Foundation, while they started out in the Republican Party, based on this kind of belief that growth is bad, and their fight with lower level capitalists, like folks that were in the John Birch Society and some of the hard right-wing groups, they kind of more or less moved into the Democratic camp. And you had, with the rise of Jimmy Carter, you had the White House putting out documents saying things like, that there is too much growth in the world. You had the Club of Rome, which is an important think tank in Europe that published a book called Limits to Growth, basically arguing that growth is bad. And this report arguing that human beings couldn't continue to advance technology. Meanwhile, if you look at at the right wing of the United States, like the hard right wing. We're not talking, just mainstream neoconservative. We're talking about the hard right in the United States, the John Birch Society, the Libertarian Party. They tend to be folks who have fought with the big level capitalists because they want to grow. The classic example is the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers were in competition with the big oil companies of the United States. Fred Koch, the father of the Koch brothers, he developed a method of thermal cracking, turning oil into gasoline. And it was much more efficient than what the major oil companies were doing in the United States. So to stop him from doing it, he got sued over and over and over again. So the only people that would hire him to use his method of gasoline, turning oil into gasoline, was Stalin. And Fred Koch ended up going to the Soviet Union. And Stalin hired Fred Koch to run the oil industry of the Soviet Union because the big level capitalists wanted to put him out of business. And the Koch brothers, their libertarian viewpoint, right, very anti-communist, was always kind of tainted with this weird belief that somehow, communism is the big oil companies that tried to put their father out of business. And there are many other examples of that, that it tends to be the lower level capitalists who tend to be the far right, and that the liberals, like the mainstream liberals, tend to be the big level capitalists. And that's a big divide. There's a great book called The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby, who was a big anti-war activist in the 70s. And he interpreted, the 60s and 70s anti-war struggle as a fight between the Eastern establishment, the Rockefeller family, the ultra-rich, wealthy people in the United States versus the lower-level capitalists. And if you look at the Trump administration, it was full of lower-level capitalists. Mike Lindell, my pillow, right? He's a lower-level capitalist, right? He's only got a couple $1 million, right? I mean, he's a poor man compared to the richest folks that run the United States. Who else? Betsy DeVos, right? She got rich. She's a billionaire, right? But where does her money come from? It comes from Tupperware parties, right? Amway, right? She's tied to Amway. So, the fact that Trump appointed her Secretary of Education, the Rockefellers and the Council on Foreign Relations, they must have been furious. They must have thought, this is ridiculous. They wanted some academic that they, paid for and gave grant money and trained exactly to say the right things. That's who they wanted, the Department of Education. And they saw, they got the Tupperware lady in there. This is like having the Beverly Hillbillies set up. They don't respect them. You think about the Trump administration is a lot of these lower level capitalists that felt kind of crushed by the big capitalists, right? Under the Obama administration, the greatest example was the oil price drop. When the oil prices tanked under Barack Obama worked with Saudi Arabia to drop the oil prices in 2014. And the oil prices dropped below $27 a barrel. You could buy a family meal at Kentucky Fried Chicken for more than a barrel of oil cost. I mean, it was awful, that oil price drop. When that happened, that devastated the fracking companies, right? Those fracking companies that make money by extracting, oil from shale and natural gas from shale. They were just devastated by that. Meanwhile, it was great for ExxonMobil and BP and Shell and Chevron because it put all their competitors out of business, and not just their domestic competitors like the frackers and the deep sea drillers, but also I put their international competitors out of business. It wrecked Venezuela's economy. It hurt Iran's economy very badly, hurt Russia's economy. The oil price drop that Obama engineered was really good for the big oil companies, and it devastated the lower level oil companies and the competitors with them around the world, the countries that have state-controlled oil and gas resources. That's an example of this. A lot of times the way environmental laws are written, let's just be real about this. Global warming is a reality. Environmentalism is a good thing. But let's be real. That the people who are rich enough to buy a seat at the table and make sure the environmental laws are written so that they don't get hurt, are the higher level capitalists. And the people who get hurt by the environmental regulations, i.e. they're not rich enough to be in the room and help write the law, they tend to be the lower level capitalists, right? And that's how it tends to work. And so, of course, under the lower level elements, you get kind of anti-environmentalism, you get kind of an attitude that we want the government off our backs, whereas among the higher level capitalists, there's a feeling that the issue isn't so much about making a maximum profit in the short term. It's rather about how can we manage society so we stay at the top of the pyramid, right? How do we think long term? And that's why the higher level capitalists, they have these huge think tanks and foundations to carefully strategize how to stay at the top of the world, how to stay at the top of the US economy. Meanwhile, the lower level capitalists, they don't care about that. They just want to make lots of money. They just want free market, privatize everything. They're not interested in managing. I've talked about how there seem to be two divides among capitalists in the United States. You have the higher level capitalists, who I call the managerial capitalists. And you have the lower level capitalists that are what I would refer to as the entrepreneurial capitalists. And that divide really defines the United States. But what those of us who are socialists need to realize is that what has made socialism strong in China, in Vietnam, in Nicaragua, and Cuba has been an alliance with those lower level capitalists. Meanwhile, the empire that we are fighting, the huge multinational corporation that is the enemy, the corporations, the huge imperialist institutions that all the socialist countries are struggling against, that the working people of this country are struggling against, those folks are the higher level capitalists, right? So really, we need to rethink who we're aligned with. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, a prosperous socialist society in the United States could have MyPillow. It could have Amway and Tupperware parties, but it would have to nationalize ExxonMobil, BP, and Shell. It would have to nationalize Amazon and put Amazon under workers' control. It would have to make Silicon Valley public property and all of that. But, in modern 21st century socialism, there are room for lower level capitalists. And in fact, part of what socialist governments do is they empower those folks, because those folks are helping the community. They believe in growth and they want to get better. They subsidize them and help them, flourish in coordination with an overall state central plan. Socialism is about having the economy organized to serve public good, not profits. And there are many lower level capitalists who would benefit from that. Meanwhile, it would be the higher level capitalists, the ones that own the huge institutions that dominate the world. They're the ones that would lose out in a socialist society.
Yes. Yeah. So based on your explanation, there's clearly the different factions within the capitalists. And as we know, there's different factions among people who call themselves socialists. The argument that some of the socialists people who call themselves socialists who are against growth use is that, we don't have enough resources. There is some truth to that to some extent, but with growth, which you've explained in your videos, we can find ways where we can continue to grow without over-exploiting resources or abusing the environment. So could you let everybody know what are some ways that we can compensate for this abuse of the environment while continuing to grow? Are there ways that we can gather resources from other places that won't affect people's lives? Why is it more true to be a socialist if you believe in growth than to believe that there should be some limitations, like some of these other people that you say that are in the synthetic left believe?
Well, there's a couple layers to this. So I'm going to come at this from a couple layers. The first thing is that, the book that was published by the Club of Rome, The Limits to Growth, that was published in the 1970s, a neo-Malthusian manifesto that was embraced by all the ultra-rich and a lot of the left, unfortunately. It makes the argument that, look, there's only this much oil in the world, there's only this much aluminum in the world, there's only this much copper in the world. So if we continue to grow at the same rate we're growing, by about the 1990s, we'll run out of resources. Well, the funny thing is that if we had continued to acquire resources in the same way we did in 1970, that would be correct. We would have run out of oil by now. We would have run out of these different things by now. Except the way human beings interact with their environment is constantly changing. Mm-hmm. Okay? What would a caveman have done with gold? Right? A caveman, he might have thought it was pretty, but he wouldn't have had any use for it, right? It wasn't until human technology developed differently that we had any use for gold, right? In the 1970s, when that book was published, we only extracted oil in a certain way. Deep sea drilling hadn't been developed yet. Fracking had not been developed yet. And there were all kinds of methods for extracting oil that hadn't been developed yet. So we're nowhere near running out of oil at this point because we've changed the way we interact with our environment. In Africa, in the Congo and other countries, there are a lot of minerals that when that book, The Limits to Growth, was published, were completely worthless. They had no value whatsoever. But that changed because of the computer revolution. Those minerals are used in computers. They're used in computer chips. They're used in PlayStations and cell phones, and they're really, really valuable now. Their value has drastically increased because the way we interact with our environment, the way we produce energy has changed. And humans are constantly changing how we interact with our environment. And that changes the nature of the resources that we use and how we use them. So the issue is not that we need to stop using resources. The issue is we need to change how we use resources. Fossil fuels are a prison house for humanity, right? Fossil fuels are creating climate change. They're a nightmare. The answer to fossil fuels is not to reduce consumption. It's not to go to lower level energy sources like windmills and solar panels. They're great, but they're not enough. It's to get to higher energy sources. We need nuclear power. We need fusion. We need nuclear fusion. And furthermore, we need to develop the space program. You know, the New York Times has run articles about how we could extract natural resources from asteroids. Where the Earth is often passed by asteroids. Imagine if we could, have spaceships or space, what do you call it, satellites or whatever, probes, go up there, mine, natural resources from those asteroids and bring them down to the Earth so we could use them. Look, when China sent their satellite to the far side of the moon, and they extracted helium-3, which is a very, very rare element on Earth. There's barely any of it on Earth, but it's abundantly available on the far side of the moon. That was for fusion energy research. China is leading the world in terms of fusion energy research because fossil fuels is a prison. It's a trap for the human race. We can't keep on fossil fuels. Now, as far as the issue of socialism believing in growth, Karl Marx wrote a very important pamphlet, and it's called The Critique of the Goethe Program. And Karl Marx wrote this because back in the 1870s, there was a group of socialists who gathered and they wrote a manifesto. And Marx read their manifesto and he was like, this is so wrong. And so he wrote this pamphlet, Critique of the Goethe Program, talking about what was wrong with this Goethe program, this Goethe manifesto these socialists wrote. And one of the things that Marx didn't agree with in the program is he said that, they were calling for the redistribution of wealth. And Karl Marx is saying, no, we don't want to redistribute wealth. We want to change the way wealth is created. We want collective, we want the means of production to be working for all of society, not for profits. We don't want to just redistribute the wealth that's created. We want to change the way wealth is created. We want to change property relations. And in that particular manifesto, Karl Marx talks about how the higher stage of communism, like the goal of a stateless, classless world, is only possible with vast material abundance. You can only break down inequality in society when there's enough for everybody. Inequality is rooted in scarcity, right? That's why, if there's enough for everybody, people don't hoard. It's when there is scarcity that you have inequality. That is the basis of it. And the problem with capitalism is that capitalism is a system where abundance creates poverty. Under capitalism, the capitalist is constantly trying to produce as much as he can, right? He wants to produce as much as he can, but pay as little as possible for it to maximize his own profits. So he advances technology. He eliminates workers from the assembly line, and he tries to pay the worker as little as possible and produce as much as he can. And the result of doing that is that pretty soon the market is full of products that can't be sold because workers are also consumers. And if you push people out of their jobs, if you eliminate people from production, if you drive wages down, they can't afford to buy back the products that they produce. There's a story called The Coal Miner's Riddle, right? And the story goes like this, right? There's a coal miner and he's with his son. And then his son says, Father, why is it so cold? And the coal miner says it's cold because we can't afford any coal to light the stove. And the boy says, well, Father, he says, why can't we afford any coal? And the coal miner says, because I lost my job at the coal mine. And the boy says, why did you lose your job at the coal mine? And the father says, because there's too much coal. That's capitalism. It's a deeply irrational system. You need the banks and the factories and the major industries to be organized to serve, the people. And when you do that, you can have growth at the same time as you have an elimination of poverty. Growth doesn't create poverty. That's the problem with capitalism. Growth isn't bad. Growth is good, The problem is under capitalism, there is this contradiction where growth leads to poverty. And that's what needs to be overcome. Socialism is the way to do that. And within a rational economy where you have economic planning, you have major centers of economic power controlled by society, you have banking under the hands of the state, you could have small business owners who could really prosper and flourish. And in my book, Getting Rich Without Capitalism, I gave it that name, that provocative name, Getting Rich Without Capitalism, to make that point. Socialism is not anti-growth, but liberalism is. And what passes for leftism, synthetic leftism, is very anti-growth. And I will say, it's interesting. I get a lot of flack for saying that, eventually we're going to have to find an arrangement where we're going to have an alliance with these low-level capitalists. But it's not a secret from anybody that most of the liberal activism in the United States is paid for by George Soros. It's paid for by the Ford Foundation. It's paid for by the Rockefeller think tanks. And people want to pretend that that doesn't mean anything. It's like, the ultra rich of the United States, the Ford Foundation, Soros, the Rockefeller, they just set up these think tanks to just give money away to have people do liberal activism. You really think that's what's going on? The Ford Foundation and the CIA are like this, right? And Soros was heavily involved in the color revolutions in Eastern Europe to bring down socialism. And what we've seen is through the process of these, I don't know what you want to call them, these NGOs or whatever, we've seen socialists stop being the anti-imperialists and stop being the revolutionaries, but instead be kind of the goon squad of the ultra-rich in their fight to control the lower-level capitalists. And we are on the wrong side. We should be aligning with the lower level capitalists to bring down imperialism. We're on the wrong, not only is this buying off and making the socialist movement not revolutionary, but they're fundamentally on the wrong side of the contradiction because socialism is about growth.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Caleb, but from my experience, I've seen that the lower level capitalists, people with libertarian mindsets, are more involved and understand the systemic problems of our country more than the synthetic leftists do. Like I see libertarians at Assange protests. They support anti-imperialist people who stand against regime change wars, like Rand Paul, Ron Paul, Tulsi Gabbard. And in order for socialism to be achieved, we're going to have to convert more people to socialism. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. Who do you think is easier to convert into socialism? The lower level capitalists, or the synthetic leftists?
Well, I think that it's not a matter of going to either of those groups. It's a matter of getting to the masses. Look, libertarians, you're right. They're more open to criticism of U.S. foreign policy. They're more open to understanding, who the ultra rich is and who they control it. But a lot of them just have this block in their head. They think somehow Jeff Bezos is a communist. Bill Gates is a communist. They're all communists. Everything evil is communist, communist, communist. They think the magical free market will solve everything. A lot of them do really believe that, especially these lower level capitalists, they got rich, so everyone can, right? It worked for me, right? I mean, so there's a problem there, right? Just like with the synthetic left, you have all the problems. The libertarians, you have similar problems. The main thing is to get to the masses. It's average Americans who are seeing their homes and their communities, crumbling, who are losing their jobs, who are seeing this huge global capitalist system destroy their lives, seeing a huge police state being set up and don't like it. That's who we need to get to. We need to get to average people. I've raised the slogan, out of the movement to the masses, right? We need to get to the masses. That's who we need to get to. And once there is a mass grouping of people that are interested in socialism, of average working class people who love their country, love their community, and understand that socialism is the answer and imperialism must be dismantled. Once there's that, at that point, alliances strategically could be made at that point, right? The main thing is we have to get to the masses because the synthetic left, what they call the movement, Antifa, the forces dominating the Black Lives Matter movement, your average Black Lives Matter marcher is just a person who wants to end police brutality, but the think tanks, Black Lives Matter Incorporated and stuff, those elements are really they are the attack dogs of Jeff Bezos. They are the attack dogs of Bill Gates. And they're trying to control a rebellion of lower level capitalists. That's not where we want to be. Karl Marx wrote a very good pamphlet called The 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon. And in it, he talks about how, Napoleon Napoleon III, Louis Bonaparte, became kind of the dictator of France. And to do it, he built this army of la bohème, bohemians, like hippies, basically. This army of hippies and criminals, like lumpen elements, and used them to kind of beat back the rest of the capitalists of France so he could be the dictator and try to stabilize the economy on behalf of the big bankers, right? And that happened in France, and it ultimately failed and led to the Franco-Prussian War and the Paris Commune, etc. But this is what happens. This is called Bonapartism. Sections of the capitalist class battle against each other because they want to end the crisis. The crisis of capitalism is becoming unstable. The rate of profit is dropping. Society is becoming less stable. So one section of the capitalists is battling against other sections of the capitalists, all because they want to solve the problem. They want to, use the government to try and stabilize the economy. They just don't want to pay for it. They want the other capitalists to be the ones to pay for it. So they want to seize control of the government. And this is called Bonapartism. And this is something that naturally happens in capitalist crises. You can talk about Roosevelt being kind of a left-wing Bonapartist. You can talk about Hitler being a right-wing Bonapartist. It's the same phenomenon where one section of the capitalist class seizes control of the state and kind of builds an army of people to be their goon squad to kick the rest of society around and try to stabilize the system. The thing is, unless you have socialism, unless you get rid of profits and command, it doesn't really work. And it tends to just lead to war. And we saw that in World War II. We saw that in France with Louis Bonaparte, right? That Bonapartism, because it doesn't solve the problem of production organized for profit, it just, has a lot of government spending, basically. You still end up back at square one. You still have huge wars. You still don't solve the problem. Socialism is the answer.
So, final question here, Caleb. How can we reach more of the masses about socialism? Like, what advice would you give the audience for how they can spread the message and how they can convert people into socialism so that that movement can grow and so that we can get closer to it?
Well, a lot of people, I do my live streams all the time, and a lot of people say that they have shown my videos to their relatives who are Trump supporters, who are conservatives, who are libertarians, and they've been blown away. I don't sound like a socialist normally sounds in the United States. I'm not on there screaming and calling people racist and sexist and transphobic. I'm not on there, saying that Americans are all a bunch of racist Euro settlers who deserve to be poorer and how dare they. I'm on there saying I love my country, I love my community, and there's a huge group of multinational corporations that are driving our living standards down, pushing us into a new war with China that we don't want. Working to set up a police state and take our liberties away, and that we need a government of action that will fight for working families against this insanity. And that's a message that's pretty much what the Bolsheviks said in 1917. That's what Mao said in China. That's what Fidel Castro said. But to a lot of Americans, that doesn't sound like socialism. They think socialism is an idea that kind of hates average Americans and wants chaos and destruction. So people hear me talk and they say, wow, this guy sounds, totally different. And I've been working with the Center for Political Innovation, CPI, to try and get to average Americans with that message, that socialism is about making your life better. And it's about, I tell people I'm a socialist not because I want to destroy America, but because I want to save America. I want to save America from the horrors of capitalism and imperialism. And we need a new type of socialism, a constructive socialism. Right? That's what we need. We need to break with the destructiveness and the anti-growth politics that dominate synthetic leftism. And part of that is, look, I wear a suit. I get attacked for wearing a suit. This is a fascist uniform. Did you know that?
Wow.
It's a fascist uniform. But I wear a suit because I want people to know that I'm a serious person, right? If a politician in a working class neighborhood is running for city council and he's knocking on doors, he'll wear a suit, right? If someone's, if someone's starting a business or they're in a community, they'll wear a suit, right? If you want to look like a serious organizer, you wear a suit, right? And we need to just change the aesthetics of socialism. Socialism needs to be about growth. It needs to be about strength. It needs to be about empowering people. It needs to be about love and that feeling of community, right, that people get. When they feel like they don't have to be afraid anymore, like they can depend on other people, right? That's what socialism is really about. It's about getting past the individualism, the negativism, the hate of capitalism, and being able to depend on each other. Socialism, the root word is society. Communism, the root word is community. It's about love and community values and trust and rebuilding, basically what holds civilizations together. The common effort, the common vision.
Yeah. People need to also realize that there's more normies out there, like people, regular working class Americans out there, than the people who find somebody streaming with playing video games, like in their basement or living room. They'll find the people with the suit. Like these normies will find someone with the suit more appealing and more credible than those people that just sit around their homes playing video games talking about socialism. While they're also repeating CIA talking points. I mean, we know who we're talking about here. But Caleb, thank you very much for being here. Where can people find you?
I'm at calebmaupin.com, CalebMaupin.com. You can also find me on YouTube, Caleb Maupin. You can find me on Twitter. I'm everywhere. And, get out of the movement, get to the masses. We need a government of action to fight for working families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I look forward to having you on again, Caleb. Thank you again. And to everybody else, stay informed. I'll see you soon.